Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey, good morning or afternoon or good night, wherever and whenever you are listening to the Voice of Gord podcast. How's it going? It's a Friday morning here in the kitchen studio. Been a couple weeks since I released an episode. Man, I have been busy. Life is what it is, and I haven't been able to carve out any time for editing. Sitting on a pile of episodes, and finally got around to doing some last night. Today's show, I bring you returning guest Ms. Donna Laframboise, former journalist and writer with a number of magazines and publications in Canada, and we discussed her upcoming book, Thank You Truckers. Donna was on the show last year. The book is going to be coming out hopefully this summer, and we discussed the book and updates on the Coutts Four, who are now the Coutts 2, and various other shenanigans related to the Freedom Convoy and life in Canada under the Trudeau regime in 2024. I hope you guys will find this a enjoyable and informative show. So please have a look through the show notes to find Donna online, her Thank You Truckers Substack, her Opa's Convoy Letters children's book, which I highly recommend. I think you can follow her on Twitter as well. And hey, thanks for listening. Again, apologies for the couple of weeks of delay in getting a show out. And thank you for understanding. It's a one-man show around here. I do all the recordings myself. I do all the editing myself. Booking guests, research, writing, the whole nine yards. It's all me. I'm a one-man show, and I do this for a grand total of $0. If you want to chip in some money, you can go to my Substack, autonomoustruckers.substack.com, and become a paid subscriber. It's the only place I take money. Again, the show will always be free, but if you feel that you derive some value from it and have some to offer me, head on over there. If you're not subscribed to it, you should subscribe anyway. That way you won't miss an episode of this show or any of my other writing work. A couple of weeks ago, I had a essay, published at American Compass called Crash and Churn, which describes in detail why the driver shortage narrative is fake and all of the various problems related to that fake narrative. And I thought it was a pretty solid piece of writing. Maybe I'll include that in the show notes here as well. The trucking industry is a little bit weird. Its media ecosystem is even weirder, and sometimes it feels like I'm screaming into the void here. So if you guys want to read and share that article for me, that would be fantastic. All the folks I saw at the Mid-America Truck Show in Kentucky a week and a half ago, g'day. I had such a good time with you. It was nice hanging out and getting to see the sort of vestigial remains of the trucking industry in America in 2024. What a great party. I recommend everybody go to Matt's at least once in their life. It's Burning Man for truckers. All right, well, without any further delay, let's get to Donna Laframboise. And thank you, truckers. All right, g'day everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Voice of Gord podcast project. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're going to hear today, you would have heard once before. A returning guest to the show, former journalist for the Toronto Star, National Post, Toronto Life magazine, various other publications, and a lady who has taken on the Studs Terkelesque project of interviewing so many truckers and other workers and various people who took part in the Freedom Convoy, author of Opa's Convoy Letters and the soon to be released Thank You Truckers. Welcome back to the show, Ms. Donna Laframboise.
Thank you, Gord. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, so we spoke last year and you filled us in on your life in journalism and letters, your upbringing in Sudbury, your various adventures in writing for different newspapers and magazines in Canada. And we touched on your book, which is still not out yet. In the meantime, you've been leaking out little bits and pieces of it on your Substack, which is great. Every morning at 6 o'clock, there's a new little tidbit for people to read. I think it's excellent and everyone should check it out. So, what's going on with Thank You Truckers?
Well, I am hopefully coming to the end of the book. The problem with this project is that there were thousands and thousands of people who took part in some way in the Freedom Convoy 2 years ago. There were lots of truckers and there were mechanics and there were all sorts of other people who just got in their vehicles and came across the country with the convoy. And then there were all of these people along the way who helped out. And, I'm just at the moment documenting this farm, a glorious farm, which was an hour outside of Ottawa, east of Ottawa. And some local women decided, let's do some coffee and muffins for the truckers on their way to Ottawa to welcome them. And then it just grew and grew, and other people in the community started dropping off all sorts of food. And so what was initially one day with a few muffins and some coffee grew into a 3 week. Let's host the truckers. Let's give them 3 hot meals a day. Let's give them a place to stay if they need to get out of Ottawa for a little while. So these stories are endless. I can't think of any protest ever in Canadian history that had this kind of spontaneous grassroots support just spring up all over the place to say to these protesters, we're behind you and we're going to do everything we can to help you and to assist you in getting your point across to the government.
That's been one of the heartening things in reading your Substack is just the amount of people that came out and helped. The amount of people who would do something as simple as buy a coffee or give a letter of support or pay for hotel rooms, pay for repairs on trucks. Magically show up with the right part just when it was needed. The sort of spontaneous outpouring of support for these guys was pretty incredible.
Yes, and as I say, I can't think of any other protest movement that has ever received a fraction of the support. It is really remarkable. It is historic, and it's a shame that as Canadians we don't necessarily know about it. We don't know much about it, and we're not celebrating it. And so I feel that I am writing Canadian history. I am documenting Canadian history by going around and collecting these stories. But they're just a small fraction. And every time I speak to someone and interview them, they say, "Oh, you should talk to this person. You should talk to that person. Let me get so and so on the phone. You really need to speak to them and hear their story." So it really is an endless project, and that's been a challenge for me. So at some point, I have to just say, "Stop. I'm going to string all of these stories together." But we all need to understand it's just a small little fraction of this amazing thing that happened 2 years ago.
Right. So at some point, not everybody's going to make it into the book, even though you have a vast selection of stories to choose from. And again, so when do you think you're going to finish that process and get something out?
I'm hoping by mid year, so around June or so. I'm really hoping that we're going to be in a place that we can, that all the editing will be done, all the copy editing will be done, the artwork will be done, and we will have a final finished product. That's what I'm aiming for, June.
Right. No, in my own sort of, writing project, as it were, no matter the story, you can keep finding new angles. And I'm hoping to, what's today, February 1st. This will probably be released in another week or two. but I'm trying to write some more on the situation with the Coutts guys out in Alberta. And every time I talk to somebody out there or some person who's connected to it, I just find out more and more stuff.
Yes.
And the rot runs so deep with that. And something you just said, that nobody knows about this. I mean, obviously, the media in Canada, such as they are, have not been helpful in discussing this moment in Canadian history because it doesn't suit the ends of their financiers, their editors, or the sort of caste of people they represent, right? Like they're not interested in regular folks that live out in the country like these ladies who fed everybody outside of Ottawa, or the Hutterites and Mennonites and various other communities across the prairie who came and met the convoy on its way to Ottawa, doing the same thing, offering food and whatever assistance and support they could. Like it's really sad to say, but the ruling class in Canada view the people they govern as their enemy, and we are not going to find any friends in their media organs. So it's up to folks like yourself and myself to tell these stories. So be it. Speaking of Coutts, you've been following and writing on the recent court decision that came down from the federal court that ruled that Trudeau acted illegally and his invocation of the Emergencies Act was unconstitutional, unreasonable, and unnecessary, I believe, were the words of the presiding judge. Would you like to speak to that a little bit?
So it was a very important court decision because we have now had a court rather than a public inquiry, which the court decision actually addressed this issue. They said the public inquiry is fine, but it all it can do is make recommendations and suggestions. It has no force of law. It has, it's just kind of hanging out there. So this court ruling by a judge in a federal court, a very experienced judge, is important. And
Richard Mosley was his name, I believe.
Richard Mosley. So, I have read that decision very carefully before I said much about it at all, and
It's quite lengthy.
it is. It is. It's 126 pages, and then another 60 pages or so of appendices. So there was a great deal of euphoria, very understandable euphoria amongst certain groups of people when the decision first came out. Those people hadn't read the decision, and I have, and I think it's very reasonable to feel hopeful because a judge looked at the law and said whatever his personal sympathies might be, the law did not permit him to rule that the Emergencies Act was legal and called for. So that is something to celebrate. However, it's important to notice that the judge was incredibly hostile to the protesters, to the convoy. And in some ways, it's remarkable that he ruled the way he did. But this is not a judge that is friendly to the convoy. There are some very disturbing errors of fact in his ruling, for example. So he mentioned that most of the people who donated money to Give, Send, Go for the convoy were Americans. And
That's
that was
not true.
well, by volume, more people made donations to Give, Send, Go. But Canadians, even though fewer Canadians donated most of the money marginally, but what came before was GoFundMe, and GoFundMe was 88% Canadian donations. And it's only after GoFundMe shut them down and made a scandal because they were going to take those $10 million that people had donated to the truckers and give it to other charities. That was their first announcement. It was only because of that scandal that Americans even found out really about the convoy. And then they went over to Give, Send, Go, and a lot of people gave money. But here we have a judge who has falsely talked about the finances and has left a very false impression. He said most of the money came from Americans. That's what his decision says. This is a very important court ruling, and there are some serious errors of fact in
Right.
it.
Well, a lot of those errors of fact are because the media, again, have been, and pardon my language, they've been lying their asses off about the Freedom Convoy since day one, right?
Yes.
And getting back to the judges, one of the things I found out in my investigations into all this is that, we have a problem in Canada with the judiciary being pretty much majority Liberal Party apparatchiks, donors, members, whatever you want to call them. Like 76% of judges in Canada are part of Justin Trudeau's party.
Yes.
And we have a problem with judicial activism where
Yes.
they've taken it upon themselves to just not hear challenge like charter challenges to what went on under COVID. They just won't hear it, or they rule it moot, even though the government still has the power to do certain things. And they also said some you know, incredibly hostile things to the convoy, which are, you know, if you're a judge, you're supposed to be impartial and you're not supposed to weigh in on things. Like these were like legitimately improper things for judges to say. Like Supreme Court Justice Richard Wagner had given an interview to Le Devoir in Montreal in French language. Interesting how, when Trudeau wants to call everybody racist and misogynist, he goes on to Quebec TV. And then when the Chief Justice of Canada wants to say incredibly offensive and improper things for a judge to say, he runs to a newspaper in Quebec too, hoping the English Canadian media won't notice. But he
Yes.
basically said that like the truckers were engaging in anarchy and the government should use the full force of state against them. Like, how can you say that as a judge? That's not for you to say. I mean, Trudeau can say it, the government can say it, but you're supposed to rule on things after seeing the facts. And
Exactly.
and Wagner just came out and said this stuff like off the cuff.
He's the head of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, he's the big cheese. He is like the biggest judge in Canada, and he's saying these ridiculous things that he shouldn't be saying. And then former Supreme Court Justice, I believe her name's Beverly McLaughlin, longest serving Chief Justice in the history of Canada, first female Chief Justice in the history of Canada, also came out and said some like incredibly ridiculous things about this protest that like you're not supposed to say in that position. You're a judge. You're supposed to be impartial. And they came out and said like incredibly politically charged things. Like, how are Canadians supposed to have any faith in the judicial system when judges are repeating facts, which are not facts, they're incorrect, and giving their opinions, which are on the side of the government, before any trials have taken place and from the position of being judges? Like, they're just not supposed to do that. Like, how are we supposed to interpret this?
Well, you're absolutely right. How, yes, you know, they tell us all the time when they give out sentences that the sentence has to, serve the community and promote faith in the justice system. We can't let someone off because that would undermine our faith in the justice system. And then they go and behave this way, and it's entirely problematic, and it makes you fear for the future, for what kind of country we are turning into. It's a terrible problem.
Right. And another problem we're having with this is probably less the judiciary and more the government is something I've come to find out through discussions with Chris Barber. I'm hoping to get that episode out later today, hopefully, or it might be next week. Is the government, the Crown, are now appealing the acquittals of regular old protesters who showed up in Ottawa, right? So the one I heard about in particular is this woman named Christine Decaire. She's from Peterborough and she went to Ottawa and just showed up. No truck, no vehicle, no nothing, just a regular old pedestrian protester exercising her rights in a democratic society to say, enough is enough. Was charged with the usual litany of ridiculous, spurious charges by the Ottawa police. Intimidation, failing to follow police, mischief. You know all the ones I'm talking about. And it went to trial, and she was acquitted because there was no evidence. Like, she was just a protester doing perfectly legal things. So the Crown, the judges were like, "Nope, you're acquitted. Have a nice day. Sorry about your luck." And the Crown is now appealing that. And apparently, there's a number of these cases where the Crown is basically appealing acquittals. I'm not an expert on Canadian law, but I live in the United States now. And in the US, there's a concept called double jeopardy, where if the government can't make its case against you for some criminal charge or whatever it is they're coming after you for, and the court is the judge rules, nope, you're innocent, see you later. The state can't come back at you for the same charges. Like they just can't. They're not allowed to. And
Right.
I guess the rules are different in Canada, or maybe what's the technique they're using here to appeal these acquittals?
Well, I don't know, and I have no direct knowledge of Christine's case, but I am very alarmed by this. It's bad enough that court resources were used the first time to bring these people into the courtroom, and in some cases the trials have just dragged out and they've come to court numerous times. You finally go through that process and it's stressful, and you've had to hire a lawyer, and you go through that process, you are acquitted. A judge hears the evidence and says, there's nothing here, go on with your life. And then the Crown comes back and appeals. How outrageous. And this is one of the problems with a non-functioning mainstream media. If the media was publicizing the fact that this was happening to people, that a judge had heard the case, said there's nothing here, go away, and then the Crown is bringing it back again, that is something that everyone, I think many people, would be outraged by, but they don't know because the mainstream media is not letting us know that this is happening, and that is a serious, serious problem.
Yeah, they're doing their best to stymie any discussion about this at all. You would have seen, I'm not trying to brag here or anything, but like I was invited on to the Tucker Carlson show,
Yes.
one of the biggest media personalities in the world. Yeah, Mr. Carlson saw my writings in Newsweek and on Substack, and given that he was coming to Alberta, he was highly interested in what was going on and invited me on the show. So I accepted it as an opportunity to discuss, especially the Coutts Four guys.
Yes.
So anyway, I go on Tucker. It goes live on Twitter and around the world, and nothing. The Canadian media basically, they freaked out because he was in Alberta at all. They objected to things he said on stage in Calgary and Edmonton, but almost to a piece, very few of them even mentioned the fact that Tucker brought up the Coutts Four, and if they did mention it, they did it in a dismissive way, like, what's he doing bringing up these, accused terrorists?
Yes.
And no discussion about my appearance on his show whatsoever by anybody.
Wow.
And I've come to find out that like our quote unquote friends in the conservative media are also uniquely uninterested in this story with these guys in Coutts who are being railroaded. And I spoke with a gentleman who's, without giving too much away, in a position to know these things. And basically, his take on it is that the Conservative Party are very worried that, somewhere between now and 2025, when the election comes, that who knows, that's a long time in politics. And they don't want any obstructions to putting Pierre Poilievre in the prime minister's seat. And so they just don't want to talk about the Coutts guys because they're afraid of the media. They're afraid of the CBC and CTV and all these guys, calling them terrorist enthusiasts or whatever, even though there's so many holes in the case, and it's pretty much verifiable that the government has been lying about what went on out there, and the media have been lying about it. There was a publication ban put on certain items related to the case, and the reason that happened is because they're basically baseless allegations of the RCMP and the Crown that when the judge looked at it, knew they would poison the pool of potential jurors and said, you guys can't talk about this because there ain't much here to substantiate your claims. And basically, it'll ruin the chances of getting a decent jury for these guys. But a whole bunch of those articles are still live, right? And like there's so many political angles, there's still no trial, denied bail in a country where everybody gets bail. Like there's so many questions about this case. but nobody will talk about it. Nobody will talk about it even after Tucker Carlson talked about it. Like there's this code of silence, and then you would think that like there would be people on our side who are pro Freedom Convoy, pro freedom in general, skeptical of the COVID regime, and outside of a small handful of people such as yourself, nothing. They just will not discuss it. And like prominent members of the quote unquote conservative or freedom media, nope, they won't talk about it at all, no matter how much you bug them about it or point any of this stuff out. So like the rot goes deep.
Yes, and I don't know what's going on. And, as I think I've mentioned, when it comes to those kinds of cases, I will not say anything with if I haven't done the research. And because I've been so busy with my own book, I have not personally done the research. So,
Fair
so
enough.
there's very little that I'm prepared to say. And, I wish I could clone myself and have one of me working on the Coutts case, but at the moment that's not possible.
Right. So, but there are those of us who are,
Yes,
and I've been doing a lot of work on it. And
you've
if
been.
if if you're, I have made this offer to folks in the media, like, hey, I have everything here. I have the connections to the families. They spoke to me. I worked for months on this piece for Newsweek. Like, I got all the intel. I'll help you out. Nothing. They just there's something's going on here, and it's basically like a conspiracy of silence. And these four men and their families are pretty much getting thrown under the bus for political considerations, which is pretty disgusting. Right. Yeah. A minor technical glitch there, folks. I'll have to stitch that back together. Where was I? Yes. Conspiracy of silence. And what do you make of that, Donna? Given what you've spoken with so many people across the country who are, pretty disgusted with the inversions of reality they saw in the media with regards to the Freedom Convoy protest. And we have all these people who are continuing to have cases dragged out and punishment and the Coutts thing. And the media are basically either doing the same thing or they're just omitting it entirely. Like when you speak with folks, what's your sense of what's going on there?
I don't know. I don't know what the explanation is. Now, there was a big gathering last weekend, wasn't there, around Coutts, where a lot of folks in Alberta kind of went down to Coutts, and then kind of did a slow roll near the remand in Lethbridge. Was
Yeah,
that
they went to both. So there was a fundraising slow roll to raise money for the men and their families, and a whole bunch of people went to Coutts, the town, the border crossing town, and then back to Lethbridge to the remand center where two of the four men are being held.
right? So, so that's good to see. That's very encouraging. It sounds like there's the momentum is gathering. In Western Canada, that there is. But I don't know. I don't know what the explanation is. I have spent much of my life as a journalist saying, I think this is a story, X, whatever it happens to be. Usually it's contrarian, usually it's anti-narrative. Why is this not being reported? And trying to persuade editors that it's a story in the first place. So I've had that problem all my life as a journalist, thinking that, why are we not talking about X? This is important. So when I look at what's happening with Coutts, and what you're saying is even the conservative media is avoiding it. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the explanation is, but it is very disturbing. And you're right. I have been quite shocked by the number of times when I'm conducting an interview with people, they make very spontaneous, unprompted denunciations of the mainstream media. One trucker told me he was sitting in his truck in Ottawa. He's from Nova Scotia, and the CBC come up to his truck and say, "Can we interview you?" And he says, "You can interview that front tire. I'm not talking to you. You lie all the time." So he was already there, but there are tons of ordinary people who said, once I went to Ottawa and saw how dramatically different the reality was from what I was being told, that's changed my life. I've stopped listening to the news. I used to watch the 11 o'clock news before I went to sleep every night. I don't do that anymore because of, so it will be interesting 10 or 20 or 50 years down the line to look back at this particular event just from a media trust perspective, because it's starting to feel to me like it was a watershed moment, and the media has no idea that it's basically committed suicide by the way it handled the coverage of this protest.
Right. And there's the sort of wider issue with, you know, the consensus making apparatus and how we all come to agree on things. And it's hard to, manage society, build policies, get along when people have two completely different views of
Yeah,
what is actually in front of you, like objective reality. And, the media are basically guilty, I think, of distorting reality so badly now that consensus making apparatus is basically toast. Like, who's ever going to trust these people again, and why would you? And here we have again. I keep banging on about Coutts because I think it's so important. You know, we have this issue with these guys who are, if you look at all of the available evidence, all of the sort of uh, the context in which their case exists, the political ramifications, the actions of the state, and just you take everything as a whole, it becomes apparent immediately. Like, even if you don't agree with me that they're being railroaded, there's something extremely fishy going on here. And that's just reality. Like, there's no arguing that. But because they're doing this thing of like omitting it, why would it, they're not doing anything to like gain my trust back by just trying to sweep this under the carpet and pretend it's not happening.
that's right. That's right. And you're right. I spent part of my official journalism career writing about the wrongly convicted. And there are certain red flags that there are things that sound and look fishy, and it doesn't make it 100% that they've been wrongfully convicted, but it sure points in that direction. And that's the vibe I'm getting from the Coutts thing. There are some very highly irregular things going on, so you better have some very compelling evidence to back up the Crown's position and the police position. And there is no indication that that evidence exists that I've seen. And you would think after 2 years, if there was, we would all know what it is, right? So yes,
Well,
even though
given the severity of the charges, you think like they'd have a rock solid case and they would just get to it, but that's not what's happening.
that's right, absolutely.
Speaking of cases and your own work and the people you've interviewed, Guy Meisner, is it Meisner or Meisner?
Meisner.
Guy Meisner, Nova Scotia trucker, the fellow with the old R model Mac.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I think in an email you told me he's coming back to Ottawa for a ninth time to deal with the charges against him.
that's right. He's in court next week on the 8th, which I think is Thursday. And my understanding is that is the ninth time he has driven to Ottawa for his mischief charges. So he has a mischief charge and he has an obstruct police charge. And that one is particularly ridiculous because he was not even sitting in his own truck when he was arrested. He was sitting in his friend's truck. He was merely a passenger. And the cops come up to the driver's side, say, get out of the truck. Before his friend can reach for the door handle, they smash his window. So he's covered in glass now. They open the door and they pull him out of the truck. So Guy is sitting in the passenger side while this is happening. He sees the cops starting to walk in front of the truck around, and he says, okay, I'm going to just get out of the truck now or they're going to smash this window. So he gets out of the truck. He stands there. The police all agree he was entirely cooperative. They handcuff him. They take him into custody, and he's charged with obstructing arrest, obstructing police, like originally.
Absurd.
Yes, it's absurd. It is absurd. So he started out with 5 charges. They're down to 2, but he will be in court for the ninth time. And he's this wonderful, laid back guy who just says, look, I like driving. I have to drive again up here. Oh well, I'll visit some I met when I was up here for 3 weeks, sitting in Ottawa. So he's really relaxed about it, but he's also aware that the crown is trying to wear him down. And there's this term called the process is the punishment. It doesn't matter if you get convicted at the end. You have been put through this horrible, stressful process in the court system, and that is exactly what they're doing with Guy and with many others, as I understand it.
Right. So something I've come up with like a handy little saying here in the last couple of days as I've been thinking this through and thinking about the next article I want to write. Whether or not I get the time this weekend to do it remains to be seen. But when you zoom out from this, right? So like we have the Coutts thing, the Freedom Convoy thing, and then there's the context of it all, and then there's the even bigger context of like, we have this problem around the world of Western governments being beholden to forces outside of democratic accountability. You might call it globalism, globalization, international finance, WEF, whatever you want to call it. But it seems like those organizations and those powers have the ear of our government, and the citizens they're supposed to be governing for are like an afterthought or are considered the enemy.
Yes.
And I'm watching all of this lawfare go on against people like Mr. Meisner, Ms. DeCare, Chris Barber, Tamara Leach, the Coutts guys, dozens and if not hundreds more other people across Canada who are still being punished because of this. And it seems to me like all of these people and these cases are being used as a message because the government doesn't want others to get the same idea. They don't want to have thousands or millions of 18-wheeled Gandhis proving that peaceful protest is effective. Because the Freedom Convoy was effective, because the provinces started dropping things like immediately after the Conservative Party had to have a leadership convention, all of this stuff happened after the Freedom Convoy, which they would have you believe has nothing to do with the Freedom Convoy. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. But like a legitimately peaceful protest accomplished things and captured the world's imagination. Like they don't want you doing this again. And something our friends on the left should be paying attention to here, because they all, ostensibly are about peaceful protest, even though, when Antifa and BLM and all them guys get involved in things, typically they're not very peaceful. However, at heart, a lot of those people are into peaceful protest. And they should be paying attention to what's happened to the Freedom Convoy here instead of believing the media. They should ask themselves, why are these people continuing to be punished? What is the message the government's trying to send? Like, they literally do not want people to understand the power they have to organize themselves and engage with their rights in a Western democracy to petition the government for redress. And I mean, the Freedom Convoy basically scared the pants off of the establishment and the sort of wider world powers, right? And
Yes.
so punishments will continue to flow as a message to people. Don't you dare try and do this again. That's
Yes.
my that's sort of my take on this.
Yes, and I think you're right. I think, one of the things, though, that's interesting is that I've gone to a number of events in the last year or two where, people who, are freedom minded. Not all of them are conservative. In fact, my husband laughed. He said, we went to this one gathering, and he said, I thought I'd gone back 30 years in our history when we were going to all these left-wing protests. There were a lot of people in the room who actually would never could call themselves conservative, but those people lost their jobs at places like universities because they wouldn't get vaxxed, and so are very find themselves very much aligned with the freedom movement. And I think the interesting thing is that the freedom movement is more diverse than we appreciate. and politically diverse. So yes, I think some of those people um, should be having those conversations, and perhaps they are. And one of the things I'd like to mention is that I spent a number of years on the board of directors of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. In fact, I was a vice president of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association for a while when I was younger. And I'm a journalist. Of course, I believe in civil liberties. I couldn't do my job if we didn't have free speech. It's a very obvious, alliance here. And the Canadian Civil Liberties Association was one of the two organizations that were successful with this appeal to the federal court to say, was that legal or not when the Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act. So they look like the good guys. But let me tell you, I've been quite disappointed. So, because they had a press conference a few days after the decision came down. I have a friend who's a journalist who was at that press conference. And afterwards, he texted me and he said, Donna, the executive director of the Civil Liberties Association began the press conference by saying that they didn't agree with the truckers and that the truckers had behaved in a racist manner.
Are they doing this just to curry favor with like the mewling cabbages of the CBC and the regime stenographers of CTV? Like, why would you just repeat these lies?
But if you go to the CCLA website, they all have their pronouns on their
Oh,
biographies, so we have to give them credit. They launched this lawsuit and they argued it very vigorously and very successfully. But we're all mixed up right now, and so there are these folks, who, as my husband said, you've just had this great victory, and you're trying to dial it back, and it's bizarre. It's just bizarre. So, and part of when we talk about how did some of the wrong facts get in the judge's decision, well, the CCLA submitted a large PDF file, which was a bunch of news clippings. So the CCLA's version of what happened depends on the news clippings from mainstream media who didn't give the convoy a fair shake for 1 second and spent, first of all, the 3 weeks of the protest and then the 2 years since disparaging and smearing the folks that were involved. We're living in a crazy world right now.
yeah, I refer to those folks as regime stenographers. They just take notes from the PMO or whatever government office and then just repeat stuff. One of the funny things is, speaking of the whole racism claim, because there was that one guy with the Nazi flag, right?
Mm.
So CSIS and the RCMP still haven't produced that fella yet. Nobody knows who it was.
Isn't
And
that interesting?
isn't that interesting? They spent, I don't know how many untold millions of dollars chasing around this Jeremy McKenzie guy in his podcast and getting Five Eyes intelligence security people from other countries involved. And then, the RCMP were like, well, there's nothing here. This guy's got a podcast. Yeah, he's maybe got some bad opinions, but he's not going to throw the government over anytime soon. So they could spend resources on that. 2 years later, still no idea. So that either means one of two things: CSIS are inept, or it was one of their own, right? Like, so all this, the entire basis for their claims about an entire movement of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people across the country being a bunch of racists is a fed op with a flag that they still don't know who it is. Okay. Thank you very much. Like, I really appreciate your proper investigative work and your ability to contend with reality media.
Yes, yes. And why is the obvious thing is we have hundreds of hours, thousands of hours probably of film footage of the truckers coming across the country. There was no racist flag until Ottawa.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that interesting? And why aren't we actually talking about that fact? The
Yeah,
only
yeah, yeah. Oh, you come to a town full of feds.
it really, really does suggest that it was a plant. And my understanding is that they actually do know who that person is, and they have just chosen not to make it public. So yes, there is a reason they are behaving in this way. And if it supported the government and the media position of what went on, we would know it. But we don't. So we can infer that it's not very helpful to the mainstream narrative.
Right. So let's get this conversation back to your book a little bit. Like I say, I've been enjoying your Substack, which is Thank You Truckers, substack.com. And you've been slowly releasing little stories from all of the people who are going to be featured in your books. You mentioned the ladies at the sort of trucker support farm east of Ottawa out there by Herbie's truck stop there on 417. Do you care to share any more of those stories?
There are numerous ones. So, a little while ago, I wrote about another farm. So the women that I've just been talking about are an hour from Ottawa. Well, there was a farm that was half an hour from Ottawa, and these folks at the beginning they were very neutral, and someone said to them, "The government needs." City of Ottawa needs some help. The city of Ottawa is looking for a farm on the outskirts where truckers could come and take a break, where some of the truckers we could relieve some of the congestion from downtown Ottawa. And they were talking to a particular farm, and it was right off of the Trans Canada Highway. And then they realized that the logistics wouldn't work because of the way the entrances and exits from right there worked. So then they approached this couple with, who's a little bit close by, but 5 minutes down the road. And they said, the city of Ottawa would really appreciate it if you would help out, if there could be this staging area, this overflow. And so they said, okay, yeah, okay, we could do that. Here's this field. Would this work? And so as soon as they agreed to that, now they went and they talked to their municipality and they said, would this be okay? And I believe they talked to the police in the area. Would this be okay? They got the buy-in. They talked to some of their neighbors. We don't want to upset anyone. They were very, very responsible and very methodical about their approach to it. And then they gave the green light and said, okay, we will do this. And suddenly there was like a dozen of their neighbors are coming with their tractors to plow this field. And they plowed 80 acres of field so the trucks could come in and park. And it was just a community, spontaneous thing. Suddenly all these farmers from the surrounding area are showing up and pitching in and doing this. And then other people from the community brought these 3 massive tents, those kinds of tents they have when you have a wedding. They're enormous event tents. So they brought these off and said, here, we use them for a wedding, you can use them. So they put these 3 tents together and they fed one into another, and suddenly they had a kitchen, and it was doing 3 hot meals a day for the truckers. And then they had a play area for the kids, and then they had the storage area because the community just suddenly started dropping off all of this food and these clothes and hats and mitts and coats and scarves and again, it was just incredible. It was spontaneous, and it was just a matter of word of mouth and a little bit on social media. And suddenly the communities, you would think that this was a barn raising. You would think that this was, the biggest Sunday school picnic you've ever seen. But the community just pitched in. So the two owners of the farm, they're a francophone couple. They speak English very well, but their first language is French. And they said, hey, yeah, okay, we'll help out the city, we'll help out the truckers. We're not taking sides here. And they went through a bit of a metamorphosis over those 3 weeks that they hosted all of these people from across the country, because they heard all of these stories. They heard these stories of vaccine injury. They heard stories. They too had the media saying X, but our daughter who works in Ottawa is telling us why. How can you trust CBC now? And so the woman who's part of this couple just said, CBC was my God. I listened to CBC all the time. I was, their hosts were my heroes. And this changed her forever. This changed her forever because what she saw the CBC say about what was going on in Ottawa and who the truckers were was so at odds with the reality that, yeah, her relationship to our national broadcaster has changed forever. So it was very interesting to listen to these people because they insist they were neutral at the beginning, and then by the end of it, it was like, oh my goodness, what is wrong with our country? What is going on with our country?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I think you said this is a sort of common thread with all of the people you spoke with, that they, otherwise what the kids might call normies, just regular old working class folks, middle of the road, and then, slowly becoming red pilled, or, as the government might put it, radicalized, not by any particular ideology, but just by witnessing the lies and malfeasance of our government and its media apparatus.
That's right. That's right. And one of the other things that was very interesting is, people got freaked out when the government started talking about freezing bank accounts. I think we really, really underestimate the reverberations that went through our society when that happened. Because, this couple on this farm, she had a career in banking. She had spent 25 years in corporate banking, and then now she's retired and she works on the farm. And so she's very familiar with what happens if your bank accounts are being frozen, and she just knows how arbitrary it is. And she was so freaked out because they were technically helping the truckers, at least that was one interpretation of what was going on, that she emptied her bank account. And how she did that was she paid all of her utility bills for a year in advance. So she said, if someone tries to come and seize our property and to seize our bank account, we're at least, we're going to have our insurance paid, we're going to have our cell phone bills paid, we've got our electricity paid. So that was that was just one example of how people behaved. Other people told me, I emptied my bank account. I bought something, I paid in advance for something that didn't get delivered for practically a year. I took, X amount of money and I gave it to so and so, and I took another X amount of money and I gave it to someone else. So people were really, really frightened and rattled when the government did this. And that is not something anyone is going to forget. It's always going to be there in the back of your mind. This is how the government might behave. So our relationship with our own government changed profoundly, and no one talks about it, but it's a big thing that keeps coming up in these interviews.
You say no one talks about it. Canadians have this, I think, undeserved reputation for being, polite and maybe not as argumentative or excitable as our southern neighbors. I think we're just actually passive aggressive and two-faced little bitches, but that's just me. I'm an angry expat. But the problem is that, unless we confront what's going on here head on, my sister sent me a text message earlier today about something she'd written a couple of years ago. And let me see if I can find the response to her here. I think this might make a good quote. I said, people are lost. They want to forget that any of this ever happened, not realizing that getting past and moving on without holding those responsible to account means that the same thing will happen again.
Yes.
And there was a video getting passed around social media the other day. It's an interview with Trudeau's former security advisor, some woman who is like, part of the the sort of huddle that went on when the Emergencies Act was declared. And, never mind judges. I mean, this lady is still repeating lies. Things that were like proven verifiably not true during the Public Order Emergency Commission, whatever you think of the POEC or its aims, or, whether or not it was a bit of a charade. The OPP, RCMP, all their testimony proved that everything this woman was saying was wrong. Oh, the truckers were violent. The truckers had all these guns in Ottawa. All of that stuff, not true. Like yesterday or the day before, she's on CTV telling the whole world the same lies over again.
That's right.
Like, these people are relentless.
Yes.
And like, if we just sort of let it slide and shrug our shoulders and be like, oh, well, it's in the past, they're going to reconstruct the reality of the past to suit their own interests and continue lying about it. We cannot let that slide.
That's right. That's right. That woman's name is Jody Thomas, and she became Trudeau's national security advisor.
All right, you were saying about Jody Thomas.
Yes, so Jody Thomas was the national security advisor to Justin Trudeau, even though she has no security background. She has no training in intelligence.
Oh, really?
Yes, God knows how she got that position.
Diversity hire.
But she was in that position, and we have many people in our country, including the head of the intelligence gathering for the Ontario Provincial Police, who have a lot of training and a lot of experience, and they can tell the difference between someone venting on social media and someone who looks like they might actually pose a threat. They have lots of experience and training in those kinds of issues, and those people, the trained people, were very clear. The convoy was not a threat. There were no extremists. This was not a bunch of extremists. These were just ordinary people. But their assessment was rejected by Jody Thomas. And as far as we can tell, Jody scrolled through Twitter or her Facebook feed and decided on her own that the convoy was a violent protest. And here we are 2 years later, and she has still not amended her position. She has had time to rethink and to realize that there is no evidence behind what she said then, and she's continuing to say it. It is another example of how our government is profoundly broken. We have these incompetent people at the top. We have these people who are not impressive in the slightest, and they are running our country, and they are damaging it.
Yeah, there was a really interesting article. You ever heard of a magazine called Palladium?
No.
Yeah, they're an American magazine, sort of dissident, deep thought, deep dive stuff. Like, you read a Palladium article, like pack a lunch, 15, 20 minutes. Like, they're not involved in the shortening of attention spans like so many other media outlets are. But this summer, they published this piece about the sort of competency crisis that's affecting America. And they used a lot of examples of just systems that are failing.
Yes.
They're all kind of disparate, but when you sort of dig into what happens, it sort of points to this, government and corporate appointees to positions of power who were not picked because they're actually good at what they're supposed to be good at, or because they have any experience. It's either because of diversity initiatives, or, regular old, what's the word I'm looking for? Nepotism or favoritism, or, political expediency, why these people are in the jobs they're in. And that's affecting, like airlines, the United States Navy, various regulators, electrical grids, and other service providers. And we're seeing all these like things pop off all over the place, and it's because our society has got too many overproduced elites, if you follow the sort of Peter Turchin thesis on that. And all of these overproduced elites, many of them they're just shitbags and they don't deserve to be in the positions they're in. They're only in there because they know somebody or they're rich kids or they're whatever. And they're now in positions that require competence and they are incompetent. And it's very difficult to dislodge them. And, they get on the media and like this Jody Thomas person, they just repeat what the government once said, even though it's patently provably false.
That's right. That's right. And you're absolutely right. It was the job of CTV to say, except that's wrong. That's wrong. That didn't happen. You understand that that didn't happen. There was no wrecking ball outside the prime minister's office. It was a small little counterweight on the crane. It was not a wrecking ball. You understand the difference between two, right? That's what the media should have done, but they didn't because the media is incompetent as well.
Yeah, I loved how that, that little weight that you're supposed to have on a crane line, like talk to anybody that knows anything about cranes. And yeah, in order to keep the line steady and not blowing all over the place in the wind, they all have these little metal weights that look like you know, a softball that you would use for playing baseball, like a, underhand baseball. And that became a wrecking ball that didn't get swung at anything to wreck it, but we're still going to call it a wrecking ball because that's scary. And we
Yeah,
want people to be scared and we want them to believe everything the government says.
that's right. That's right.
Oh,
And
man, I
one
can't, I can't wait for your book to come out, Donna. I'm just,
either. So one of the gents that I interviewed, and he was incredibly articulate. You guys, you and him should get in the same room. Sam, the mechanic from Nova Scotia. So, Sam was working as a snowplow driver in Nova Scotia, and then he was mandated to get 2 vaccine shots, and he got very, very seriously ill after the first one. And he said, well, until you can explain to me what's happened here, I'm not getting a second one. So he was laid off. He lost his job. And he's sitting around and he's going crazy, and he's a very extroverted guy. And he hears that the convoy's going to happen, and his wife says, you're a basket case, you need to change the scene. Why don't you just go to Ottawa with the convoy, and so he does. And he says to me, the biggest struggle of all that I had when I was there in Ottawa was calming down the folks back home, because every morning I would get a call from my mother or my aunt or someone saying, they're going to come for you today, they're going to sonic boom you. So yes, the media was distorting what was going on then, continues to do so now, and there were real consequences. And my own husband, when I was there for a week, I would call my own husband, I would FaceTime him every night at 9 p.m. And he would say, oh, I'm listening to the media, it sounds really tense there. No, man, we're having a party. So yes, it is really important to talk about when the media loses the plot, when the media starts lying, when the media reports the exact opposite to what's going on. That harms people. It harms our society. It's not just something to bitch about. It is a very, very important thing that has happened, and we need to think about that.
yeah, well, I live in the United States and, you know, my wife is a sort of Bernie Sanders type progressive,
Yeah.
and she was not very happy with me accepting this invitation to speak with Mr. Carlson. And one of the things she said is, well, this guy is divisive and he's sort of one of these guys, people that just says things that aren't true. And I'm like, the media has been saying things that aren't true forever, right? Like, we're all anti-war. They lied their asses off to get us involved in Iraq again. They lied about the war on terror. They omit that like the United States military is involved in all of this stuff. They stopped talking about drone warfare once Obama got elected. Um, you know, they're lying about everything that's going on in the Ukraine. Like, they just lie constantly. And here is this guy offering me a chance to tell the truth about political prisoners who are being persecuted because of these same lies.
Yes.
And because it's Tucker Carlson, I'm a bad person for accepting the invitation. Like, what? And and part of the whole deal with the Freedom Convoy was that it was supposed to, like, one of the reasons so many people came out was because of the sort of rift it had caused in Canadian society. And then the media lied some more about the Freedom Convoy after lying about COVID and lying about and saying all these ridiculous things about people who are skeptical of the COVID regime. And it just keeps going on. And, never mind my wife. Like, I have members of my family and old friends of mine in Canada who still don't talk to me. They still think I'm the bad guy for supporting the Freedom Convoy. And I'm the bad guy because I didn't take the juice into my life. Right. I
Right.
have done nothing wrong except try to express truth and try and hold my government to account. That's it.
That's
I'm the
right.
bad person for doing this? Like,
Yes.
what?
I'm sorry that you're dealing with that in your own family. But you made a very important point, and that is exactly right. The media has been divisive. It was the media that said that if you didn't wear a mask, you were a bad person, even though there is a legitimate debate. And at the beginning, they told us masks were useless. Okay, it was the media said you were a bad person if you didn't wear a mask. It was the media that said you were a bad person and you shouldn't invite people to Christmas and Thanksgiving if they weren't vaccinated. And then the media, rather than trying to help us heal from a couple years of this crazy COVID uh, pandemic regime, then they decided to divide us about whether we were supporting the convoy or not. So the media doesn't do anything but divide us. I think there's a very legitimate argument that you can make that statement and back it up with very compelling evidence. The media is dividing us constantly. So to say that someone who, like Tucker Carlson, who has merely a different point of view, is divisive, kind of misses what's been going on.
Yeah, no, it's missing the forest for the trees. Oh man, like I said, so your book's coming out hopefully in June.
Yes,
Are you
yes.
are you still self-publishing?
Yes, I am, and that is the only way you can do it. So, my first book came out with Penguin Canada, and it was not a good experience. Now, it was great that they believed in me and they published my book, but the publishing process was messed up 30 years ago, and it has gotten much worse since then. If I were trying to get this book published by a major publisher, it wouldn't happen. And if it did happen, it would take at least 5 years to get there.
Oh
Because
wow.
because I'd have to find an agent who would be willing to represent me. And most agents would say, no, you're on the wrong side. You don't see the world the way I do. But even an agent who would take me on, we would go through 10 rejections. And the way the publishing industry works, you send your manuscript to one publisher. You have to wait until they decide to give you an answer before you can then send it to another publisher. That's the protocol. So
Wow.
you could wait 4 or 5 months for the publisher to say, no, 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 thanks. And then you go to publisher B and publisher C. So no, the system is broken, and yeah, that's just not viable. I'm very lucky because I've been a journalist for a long time. I have a bunch of friends who are journalists. I have people contacting me every week saying, hey, when that manuscript is ready for copy editing, I'll be a reader for you. I'll help catch the all the grammar errors, so I have this great group of people around me who by the time we're finished, it's a very professional product. It's just people doing it for free rather than the publishers doing it.
Oh, good. Good
Yeah.
stuff. And it's good to have editors. I'm in the middle of writing a series of essays for a think tank in DC about trucking industry related stuff. And
Marvelous.
the first essay went in at 8,200 words.
Wow.
They sent it back to me a little under 5,000, and it still works. I mean, I have to add it. It'll probably end up being 6,000. I got to expand on a few things, but like having a good editor is really helpful.
Yes, it is.
Um, on the self-publishing front, was it you or someone told me about this book, and I just interviewed the guy, a lawyer in Peterborough, Barry Bussey, 210 degrees Celsius.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I read that, and I think he self-published it too. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I think there were, I read the Kindle version, and the Kindle version was a little bit not as smooth as it might have been with the footnotes. The footnotes were a little bit confusing in the Kindle version. So, not every book comes out perfect. But you know what? The truth is, Kindle, a lot of publishers are taking old stuff and putting it into a Kindle version. There's all kinds of errors in there. So even if you have a brand name, blue chip publisher, the quality varies anyway. So, we have to live with it. It's
Right.
an
Well,
input.
hard copies are good, and you can get the author to sign them, and then there's like a material thing. It's in your hand, and you can give it to
That's
people and loan it, and maybe never get it back, which happens to so many of my books. um, Donna Laframboise. So, anything else you're working on besides Thank You Truckers?
No, this is consuming my life. It needs to be finished. I need to move on. My husband would like his wife back. I would like to do kayaking. Last year, I got out in my kayak exactly once, and I live on a lake. So I'm hoping to change that this year. I need to finish this up. But if I may, I would just like to let people know that early about a year ago, I did a little kids book. And the kids' book is called Opa's Convoy Letters. And because the kids are hearing the lies about the convoy just as much as the adults are. And
Which is even more evil.
exactly. So one of the truckers that I interviewed, I met him in Ottawa. I took his photograph. Afterwards, I went and interviewed him, and it turned out that this guy was a cookie trucker. He trucked cookies, I think, for 20 years for a cookie company. He was a cookie trucker, and he's a great guy, and he's got 19 grandkids. And one of the things that he did when I went to see him and his wife to conduct a formal interview is he showed me this binder, and it was full of all of these cards and letters and messages and Valentines that he had received from members of the public in Ottawa. And almost all the truckers, when I see them, they do this. They show me their box of all these letters because they've saved them, because they're these heartfelt expressions of gratitude from the public. And so I took snippets of those of the ones that were in his binder, Bill's binder, Bill the cookie trucker's binder, and I made a book for kids. When Grandpa went to Opa is Grandpa in Dutch and in German. When Opa went to Ottawa, this is what happened. People told him he was a hero. They brought him coffee. They brought him mittens. They gave him all of these messages that said, "Thank you for giving us hope, and please don't give up. We're praying for you." So that book is the kids' version of this is what happened. This is the true convoy story, and it's available on Amazon. And I think it's a very sweet book. I've never done a kids' book before, but it tells the truth about the convoy, and that's hard to find.
Yeah, and you very kindly sent a copy to me for my two daughters who both love it. I've read it to them a number of times, but
Awesome.
then again, their dad occasionally sings them "Bud the Spud" by Stompin' Tom Connors to try and get them to go to sleep. So
Excellent.
um, no, that's a great book, and people should go and buy it. I gave this speech at this weird little conference in Wyoming a little while ago, and I referenced your work and I referenced the Opa's convoy letter thing to people there, and it's really good. It's an excellent children's book, and everyone should have a truck driving uncle or grandpa in their life, and if they don't, they're missing out. And then I spoke with one of Bill's friends and I think employer at some point, Harold Yonker.
Yep, yep.
I just released that episode last week. Harold also being, punished by the Trudeau regime with all this lawfare, and just yeah, all of this stuff is bad, but it's good that you're documenting it. People need to know this very serious turning point in Canadian history where so much bad happened that inspired so much good, the bad coming from the government and the good coming from the people, the governed. And
Yes.
your project of documenting it, as I've called it before, is Studs Turkle-esque. in scope and in feeling, and I think it's awesome. And I'm really looking forward to your book coming out, Donna. In the meantime, where can people find you?
Well, as you said, thank you, truckers.substack.com. And if you sign up there, you can sign up for free. You get an email in your inbox every morning with just another little bit of my research that's going to one day, very soon, be a whole book.
All right. Next time I'm in Ontario, we should go and have a beer together and
Absolutely.
celebrate the release of your book.
That would be marvelous.
All right. Awesome. Donna, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Way of the road.